The Wind and Clouds of the Harem, The Flower of Conspiracy. Chapter 1, starting from Xianfu Palace. Xianfu Palace is an inconspicuous palace located in the far corner of the harem. It's dark and damp, the light is often dim, and the ladies of the palace work hard here, and no one cares about it. She, Meng Sulan, is an ordinary palace maid in Xianfu Palace. She was originally just a woman from a poor family, and she was elected to the palace just to be able to exchange for a job that would not starve to death. However, Meng Sulan's fate is not so simple. In the Xianfu Palace, her first days were ordinary and boring. Every day she does the most trivial things, nothing more than cleaning, arranging clothes, preparing meals. These jobs have no dignity at all. However, Meng Sulan already had a plan in her heart. She didn't believe that fate would so ruthlessly arrange her life to be mediocre, never scheming, and people who fought for power and profit were destined to not survive in this palace of power. The harem is like a chess game, winning or losing never depends on the means, only the result. This is what Meng Sulan often says to herself. She knew that if she wanted to survive in this bottomless court, she had to use her wisdom and scheming, even at the cost of deviating from her beliefs. Meng Sulan waited silently in the Xianfu Palace. She knew that all she wanted was the opportunity to change her fate. Chapter 2, The Beginning of the Conspiracy. One day, Meng Sulan met with an opportunity. At that time, a high-ranking concubine in the palace suddenly fell seriously ill, and the court sought medical treatment from all over the world, but no one could cure her illness. This concubine was the most favored concubine at that time, Nangongjin, and her illness caused turmoil in the entire palace. As a result, the power struggle in the palace heated up again, and many concubines were secretly planning their future. On that day, Meng Sulan happened to be sent to prepare medicinal herbs for Nangongjin, and when she entered Nangongjin's bedroom, she suddenly heard the conversation of the two inner palace concubines. Meng Sulan, this palace maid, is really a woman with a lot of ability. One of the concubines whispered. She's just keeping a low profile, but she's actually very scheming. It's not that there is no chance, Nangongjin is dead, and the saint will definitely set up a new concubine, and her chance has come. Another concubine responded. Meng Sulan listened to their conversation, and her heart couldn't help but ripple. She wasn't surprised that she was noticed, it was exactly what she had been planning for a long time. Her goal is simple, to reach the pinnacle of power, even by any means. Nangongjin's death, whether it is due to illness or the actions of others, will become a springboard for her to move towards her goal. If I can get this opportunity, if I can take advantage of the chaos, I can compete with those powerful ministers. Meng Sulan secretly said in her heart that from that moment on, her fate was closely tied to the power struggle in this palace. Chapter 3, Receiving the Holy Grace. As Nangongjin's condition worsened, the battle in the palace gradually became fierce. At this time, Meng Sulan skillfully entered the eyes of the court. She is good at listening, observing, and always brings a little change every time she enters under the noses of the upper echelons of the palace. She is familiar with the minds of the concubines in the palace and knows how to deal with all kinds of complex relationships. In the end, when Nangongjin's condition deteriorated and the entire harem fell into chaos, Meng Sulan decided to make a decisive move. She secretly sent some life-saving herbs into the hands of the saint, claiming that she had a secret recipe, and this was her only chance. In this way, she not only attracted the attention of the saint, but also became an existence that could not be ignored in the eyes of other concubines. This is my chance, and if I can seize it, everything can change. She thought coldly in her heart. When the Holy Lord announced at a banquet that Nangongjin's position would be taken over by herself, Meng Sulan finally walked towards her goal step by step. Congratulations to the concubine. Many concubines in the palace congratulated in unison, and Meng Sulan, the palace maid who once started from Xianfu Palace, finally became the concubine of the harem. Chapter 4, Fame and Fortune and Opportunity. After Meng Sulan became a concubine, the power struggle in the harem did not stop, but became more and more complicated. She never trusts anyone easily and is always on her toes. The position of the noble concubine meant countless challenges and opponents, and she knew that in this court, there were no real friends, only enemies and chess players. The moment she became a concubine, she was destined to face more intrigues and conspiracies. Every woman who wants to climb to the top of power is full of ulterior scheming and trickery. Meng Sulan, it seems that you have finally waited for this day. Another concubine, Gongswick, who was destined to be her enemy, looked at her coldly, with a provocative tone in her tone. The woman who climbs up knows how to defend it best. Meng Sulan sneered, her eyes shining with an unfathomable light. Gong Xui's heart sank. She knew that Meng Sulan, a woman, was by no means simple, and sooner or later she would become a powerful opponent for her. The contest between the two, from that moment on, officially began. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 5: The Fermentation of Conspiracy. The intrigues of the harem will never stop, and as Meng Sulan becomes more and more favored by the saint, there are more and more enemies around her. Gong Xui united some forces and conspired to push her into the abyss of depravity. Meng Sulan did not take it lightly at this time, but was ready to fight back. She knew that the only way was to make these conspiracies her own weapons. She began to quietly gather intelligence, trying to defeat the enemy one by one. In the end, in a grand banquet in the palace, Meng Sulan used a clever strategy to expose Gong Xui's conspiracy one by one, making her lose face in front of everyone. As long as it turns out that I'm on the top, what's the matter? Meng Sulan thought coldly. With the defeat of the enemy one by one, Meng Sulan finally completed her counterattack and successfully sat on the highest position in the harem. She is no longer a palace maid, but the concubine Niang Niang who is well versed in power and scheming. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 6: The Price of Power. However, the top of power is not so easy. Meng Sulan finally realized that although she got everything, the price was unbearable. She is burdened with too much intrigue and blood, there are no real friends around, and everyone's love for her may be just an exchange of interests. I got everything, but I lost myself. Meng Sulan reflected silently. She sat on the gorgeous bed in the harem, looking out the window at the gradually darkening sky, and her heart was filled with a trace of helplessness. This road to power may really be a dead end from which there is no turning back. But in any case, she has stood at the top, and this is her destiny, which cannot be changed. Chapter 7: Lost and Awakened. Meng Sulan stood in the depths of the harem, looking at the glorious palace. All this was her dream. However, when she actually stood on the top of this palace, she realized that the price of power was so heavy. She recalled her humble life in Xianfu Palace, although there was no fame and fortune at that time, but she had a clear and fearless heart. Is it all worth it? She muttered to herself, a hint of confusion in her eyes. Her power grew, and so did the holy being's dependence on her. However, behind this dependence lies countless intrigues and shadows. Meng Sulan began to discover that not all the hard work she put in was in exchange for the glory she expected. Every deal behind it, every coup d'état with a surging dark tide, made her heart gradually numb. There is no longer pure longing, only deep loneliness. One night, Meng Sulan sat alone in the silent garden, the drizzle falling gently, her figure lonely but determined. At this moment, a counselor in the palace suddenly appeared in front of her, breaking the silence. Lady Guifei, you seem to be a little tired lately. The strategist's tone was calm, but with a hint of alarm. Meng Sulan raised her head, and a cold light flashed in her eyes. She is well aware of the role of these strategists in the harem, and sometimes they are not only the eyes and ears of the saint, but even the driving force behind the conspiracy. What did you come to me for? She asked calmly, her tone cold. The advisor looked around and whispered, Concubine, the current situation is not as you see. Although you are at the top of the harem, now there is the power of the queen outside, and the secret movements of Gong Xui and others inside. If you continue to rely on the schemes, I am afraid that the harem will not be protected. After Meng Sulan heard this, the corners of her mouth rose slightly, and a trace of meaningful light flashed in her eyes. If I can't grasp that, then I don't deserve to sit in this position. She sneered. Seeing her so calm, the strategist was a little in awe, but he still reminded uneasily, Concubine, once these conspiracies ferment, they will even have an impact on the emperor, you must be careful. Careful. Meng Sulan stared at the night sky in the distance, her eyes becoming deeper and deeper. The result of being careful is to live forever in the shadows, never to control your fate. I want victory, not reluctance. The coldness and determination in her words made the strategist speechless for a while, and he could only bow his head and retreat. Meng Sulan stood there, her eyes becoming confused, and she thought about a question in her heart, is everything she has done really worth it? Underscore 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 un. Chapter 8: The Mirror of Conspiracy. Meng Sulan has always been good at hiding her true thoughts, but she finds that she is increasingly unable to escape the face reflected in the mirror. It was a weather-beaten, grim-faced face, with a loneliness in his eyes. The power and control she once craved were now an endless shackle. However, she didn't completely regret it in her heart, because she knew that in this deep palace, if she wasn't strong, she would be crushed to ashes by countless conspiracies and methods. Her steps are no longer purely for herself, but for the women who are behind the power and are manipulated day after day. She is no longer the palace maid with simple dreams, but a noble concubine standing at the top of the power scheme, and she knows the heaviness and loneliness of this position. One day, Meng Sulan received a secret letter from outside the palace, which contained a message she had not expected. The messages hit her heart like a hard blow. The Holy Lord is about to pass the throne of the Queen to Gongswik. The news struck her like lightning in her chest. Gongswik, a long-time competitor, will be favored by the saint and become the queen of the harem. Meng Sulan felt a violent sense of loss and anger. She couldn't bear her opponent standing above her, and even took over the most important position in the harem. It can't be. Meng Sulan muttered in a low voice, and an unwilling emotion surged in her heart. She coldly tore open the secret letter, and a new plan began to brew in her mind. If you want to maintain your position in the harem, it is no longer enough to rely on the favor of the saint. She needs a deeper strategy, even to make those who once looked down on her pay. Gongswik, your end may be earlier than you think. Meng Sulan's gaze became cold. She decides to adopt a drastic strategy, preparing to lead Gongswik into the trap she has carefully laid step by step. Chapter 9, The Deep Palace Stratagem. As time passed, Meng Sulan began to carefully lay out. She used the concubines in the palace who were dissatisfied with Gongswik to secretly pass the news to them, inducing Gongswik to fall into the game she designed step by step. Meng Sulan understands that in this war without gunpowder, the most terrible enemy is not the opponent shown on the surface, but those hidden plots. Gongswik thought that he had gained the trust of the saint, so he relaxed his vigilance. However, she didn't know that Meng Sulan's plan had already been quietly launched. This biggest conspiracy drama in the palace has finally entered a climax. At a palace feast, Meng Sulan designed a game to expose Gongswik's conspiracy to the public, making her look embarrassed in front of everyone. All of this is the result of her careful consideration. She knew that this battle would be a watershed moment for her life and death in the harem. When Gongswik's ugliness was exposed, Meng Sulan stood aside coldly, her eyes shining as deep as night. Gongswik, your time is over. She said silently in her heart. However, when she triumphantly saw that her plan had succeeded, she suddenly felt an invisible crisis looming. Chapter 10, The Shadow in the Dark. When Gongswik's conspiracy was exposed, Meng Sulan's success changed the situation in the harem again. She became the center of power in the harem, and almost no one dared to contend with her. However, the pinnacle of power is not invulnerable, and when she stands at the top, she also begins to perceive the shadows that lurk in the shadows. Meng Sulan sat in the gorgeous palace, sipping the tea in her hand, but her mind was no longer there. She couldn't help but think of her original intention. At the beginning, she only hoped to be able to get rid of the fate of poverty and fight for a new path for herself. But when she looked back, she found that she had long been swallowed up by the whirlpool of power, and the purity in her heart had long since faded. At this time, a palace maid hurriedly walked in, looking anxious. Concubine Niang Niang, someone has come to ask to see you. The palace maid's voice trembled a little. Who? Meng Sulan raised her eyes to look at her, her eyebrows furrowed slightly. The maid replied in a low voice, it's an unknown old woman who claims to have had a past with you. Meng Sulan was stunned. Old woman? She couldn't remember any special connections she had with anyone. She was silent for a moment, then ordered, please let her in. A moment later, the old woman walked into the main hall, dressed simply, with a haggard countenance, but with an invisible majesty. Her eyes are deep, as if she can perceive people's hearts. She knelt down and whispered, Gai Fei Niang Niang, you had a relationship with me back then, and you are here today to tell you the truth. Meng Sulan narrowed her eyes and looked at the strange old man in front of her, and a feeling of unease rose in her heart. She didn't remember any such woman ever in contact with her. Who are you? Listen to it. Meng Sulan asked coldly. The old woman took a deep breath, and her tone was slow and heavy. I was your mother's personal attendant, and your mother made many sacrifices to protect you and let you enter the palace. And you were born out of such sacrifices. These words were like a heavy blow that struck Meng Sulan in the heart. Her body shook, and she could barely believe what she was hearing. She always thought that she was just from an ordinary family, but she didn't expect that there was such an amazing secret hidden behind her birth. What did you say? Meng Sulan's voice trembled, but she quickly suppressed her mood fluctuations, and a trace of alertness appeared in her eyes. The old woman raised her head and met Meng Sulan's gaze, with sorrow and deep sorrow in her eyes. Concubine Niang Niang, you are not an ordinary woman, there is an unknown secret flowing in your veins. If you can remember everything, you may understand why so many women are fighting for each other in this harem, because you are no longer just a concubine, but a center of the fate of the dynasty. Meng Sulan's mood was instantly heavy. What does all this represent? What kind of bloodline did she have, and why didn't even she know it? These questions were like a hammer, striking her to the point where she could not extricate herself. What kind of past do I have? Meng Sulan asked in a low voice, a flash of confusion flashing in her eyes. The old woman lowered her head, and her tone became more and more muffled. In order to protect you, your mother once made a deal with a certain emperor to send you to the palace. You are not simply a harem woman, the family behind you has power connected to the emperor. It's also that you can step up and change everything when the time is right. Meng Sulan's heart shook violently, all of which she couldn't understand at all. Her life experience is so mysterious and profound. And who is that emperor? Why did her mother come to such an agreement with him? My mother, Meng Sulan muttered to herself. The old woman looked at her with a hint of imperceptible emotion in her eyes, and said in a low voice, Gai Fei Niang, you must be vigilant, because your presence may be the fuse of the harem battle. All the power revolves around you, and your future choices will directly determine the direction of the entire court. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 11, The Choice of Fate. Meng Sulan felt that her mind was instantly confused, her past, her bloodline that she knew nothing about, everything seemed to be collapsing in an instant. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. She began to think back to what she had done all these years. What was it for? Is it for the power in this palace, or for the fate of those she has never met? What I'm doing now, is it for myself, or is it for the power behind it? She asked herself. The confusion in her heart became more and more intense, and in the face of such a huge conspiracy, Meng Sulan began to deeply reflect on her role. In this hidden court, everyone is fighting for their own interests. However, who can remain pure in this fight? She stood up, her gaze determined, and a force was quietly rising in her heart. She understands that whether she is ready or not, she will be at the center of this court storm. And all this will be up to her to choose, no matter how difficult the road is. I won't give up easily, and I won't let fate dictate my future. Meng Sulan whispered, her eyes flashing with an unyielding light. At this moment, her choice is not only a struggle for power, but also a challenge to her own destiny. And no matter how it ends, she will go down this path until the end.